Welcome to this special edition of Invest Africa, coming to you from the World Economic Forum on Africa, which is currently in session in Cape Town. Joining me on the panel today is Anthony Thunstrom. He's the Chief Operating Officer, KPMG Global Africa Practice. I'm also joined by Innocent Duturo, partner Bain & Company, and we're joined by Iqbal Survey. He is the Executive Chairman of Sekonjalo. Gentlemen, thanks very much for joining me. Well, we're talking about YPO, and Anthony, I'm going to ask you to give us a little colour right at the start of this in terms of why YPO is relevant specifically here at the World Economic Forum.
Bronwyn, thank you. I guess in summary, YPO is a member-based organisation, 19,000 members globally. All the members are either CEO or CEO equivalents of their own businesses. Really a powerful group of companies. If you add up the GDP of those 19,000 member companies, it equates to the third largest economy in the world. So there really is some weight behind this. Why it's relevant, I think, to Africa at the moment, there is a Doing Business in Africa network within YPO, and these are YPO members who are purely focused on investing in or doing business on the African continent.
And at the heart of YPO is entrepreneurship. Perhaps, Innocent, we can bring you in at this point.
The YPO as an organization is a networking organization of peers. As Anton says, it's CEOs or CEO equivalents of businesses. A lot of people have started their own businesses and have the scars on their back in terms of building their businesses. Through the networking environment, they mentor each other. And if you take into account the Doing Business in Africa, which is a network within the YPO, we traveled different African countries. Last year, during the World Economic Forum, we were in Kenya. We were exposed to the Kenyan business environment, met government policymakers, we met entrepreneurs in Kenya, we met big business in Kenya, and matched them with potential partners from the YPO and other markets.
While we're talking about entrepreneurs, Iqbal, is to bring you in terms of the biggest challenge that you feel entrepreneurs on the continent are facing at the moment.
I think it's a number of challenges. The first is, I think, the skill set in the continent. But we can fix that quite easily by providing the educational facilities or the opportunities in education, formal and informal training. I don't think finance is a problem anymore. It used to be a problem.
It used to be the biggest gripe of
entrepreneurs. These days, there's so much funding available. But I think it is a challenge as to how you actually access that funding. I think the other thing is building the bridge between corporates that can do it and new entrepreneurs that have the ability, just to support them. So I think that's the other area. But I think Africa's in a great space at the moment.
It is in a great space, and it's growing very quickly, albeit off a low base. Of course, the biggest question, and we're going to be drilling down into this over the next 2 days, is whether this growth is sustainable.
But if you look at the nature of the growth on the African continent, it has changed. Traditionally, it has been commodity-driven, resources-driven. When you look at some of the numbers that I've looked at, there is probably about 25% of the growth in Africa is due to commodities. The rest of it is due to the growing population, the growing wealth within the population, the growing middle class. So on that respect, it's going to be sustainable, because if you look back to the early 70s, where you had similar levels of growth, they dissipated the minute commodity prices went through the floor. Yeah.
Anthony, investors must be continuously knocking on your door looking for the hotspots, the opportunities on the continent. We've touched on resources, we've also touched on the consumer story. What is missing?
I guess probably two things. One, infrastructure is a massive opportunity. As a matter of fact, I think at KPMG we would see that as the single biggest opportunity, and that's both fixing up, a historical backlog that goes back to colonial times, as well as the new demands that are generated by the urbanisation we're seeing and the huge pit-to-port opportunities around mining. But I think possibly the least known opportunity is really around agriculture. Africa really holds pretty much the last undeveloped agricultural land on the planet. There's certainly no lessening in demand for food. The population is growing. So I guess to go back to your earlier question to Innocent, I honestly don't see that changing anytime soon.
Iqbal, I want to stick with that resources story for a moment from an infrastructure perspective. Regularly at the World Economic Forum we talk about infrastructure and about boosting cross-border infrastructure. Do you think we are starting to see that materialize?
Yeah, definitely. But, you can set the policies to do that. which must be done politically between the different countries at a forum like the AU or at various other forums. But at the end of the day, it's going to be the localized public-private partnerships within a country. So, countries don't get together to build dams necessarily. It's the institutions within those countries, both in the public and private sector. And similarly with roads and bridges and power stations. But I think what we're beginning to see is a better coordination of these infrastructure efforts, and that's an important beginning.
So the first step is the coordination of the projects.
Absolutely. Policies, coordination, a clear vision, a clear understanding. And I think we're beginning to see for the first time the advent of timeframes. I'm seeing more and more ministers throughout the continent, presidents, private sector people talking about a decade or two to actually achieve the infrastructure goals that they've set themselves.
Perhaps that brings us also to an important point. Are there too many institutions trying to set policy for Africa?
Well, yes, there would be. The one thing, if I take you back, is Africa one country where you need to build infrastructure for Africa? If you look back to the development of Europe, the infrastructure in Europe was not developed at a continental level. Countries developed their infrastructure, and then the integration happened. So the cross-country institutions are way too many, and end up just as talk shops instead of implementing.
So how do we get them to a situation where it's all about implementation rather than the talk shops that Innocent mentions, Anthony?
I just think, Bronwyn, there's growing pressure in pretty much every country across Africa for upliftment. There's an expectation that, particularly as you see this massive urbanisation, Africa's already got 51 cities in excess of 1 million people. That number's climbing. We're already pretty much at the level that India is urbanised. Just the pressure of people coming together. They have expectations around power, transport. If you take a look at Nigeria, most recently, the privatisation of the power sector, I think it's really just demand from bottom up.
How do we change this perception that Africa is high risk, high reward? Or is that the reality?
Well, you can argue that the reward sort of and risk conundrum exists throughout the world, right? People don't make decisions based on this globular view of things. It's only rating agencies that do that, and we've seen the mistakes that they've made. People,
we won't start bashing the rating agencies on this show.
But I think it's an important point, Ivor, because when you talk about risk, you have to define who is defining the risk, and for a long time, rating agencies and other institutions have defined it in such a way that capital flows to institutions that are based in the West. Now you have to change that paradigm, but. We can talk about it until the sun goes down or whenever.
Or the cows come home, considering we're focusing on agriculture.
But at the end of the day, these we've invested in Africa very, very successfully. We've done that irrespective of what other people tell us of the risks and rewards. As a business enterprise, we look at the opportunity, we look at the skill set, we look at the risks that exist in that particular investment. With an investment in gas in Mozambique, which was incredibly successful. We've done quite a few other investments in healthcare on the continent. I think you're going to have some successes and some failures. It's no different to investments in Turkey or in China or in the USA or, for that matter, in Europe. So I think it's overhyped. This issue of risk and reward is far too over because business people certainly don't necessarily look at investment from that point of view. I've yet to meet colleagues of mine in the business sector globally that will not invest if they don't think there's a brilliant opportunity to invest.
Listen, let's drill down more into the successes that perhaps you've experienced. Iqbal, they're referring to the gas project in Mozambique that has been successfully executed from their perspective, and also healthcare. What other stories have you got in terms of successes that we can hold high?
Right. In our business, we work with two sets of clients. We work with multinational companies wanting to come into Africa or growing their businesses in Africa. We work with African companies or homegrown companies expanding into other geographies. in telecoms, in consumer products, etc. If you take the consumer products environment, where traditionally, as Africa, we would get the products designed and packaged in other markets and receive them and buy them as they are. Increasingly, those multinationals are looking to Africa and other emerging markets for innovation. I was in a meeting last week where a senior executive or CEO of a global consumer products company says we've ceased looking at the emerging markets as receivers of our innovation. We're getting a lot of our innovation from those emerging markets around packaging, different pack sizes of products, etc., within telecoms, within financial services, because of the advances in technology and the need for spreading financial services. Innovation is happening in Africa. M-Pesa in Kenya is a good example of a successful design or innovation that has been exported to other markets.
Anthony, for a long time we've heard that doing business on the continent is about understanding each individual country, some 54 of them, and then applying different rules to each of those territories. Suddenly now there is a move to saying if you're comparing emerging markets and you're looking at Latin America versus Asia, you've got to look at those versus Africa. Is it too soon to do that?
I think it's a little bit simplistic, Bronwyn. I think it goes, back to what Iqbal was saying earlier on. I think business people are very granular in terms of investment opportunities. If they're looking at a particular investment, I don't think they get overly fussed about a particular region. They will look at a specific opportunity in a specific country and evaluate that in terms of return and really make a decision based on that.
We touched on agriculture a little earlier in terms of one of the hotspots. Innocent, do you see moves for people to move more aggressively into the agricultural space? Is there more interest out there?
Well, the numbers show that Africa has probably the largest proportion of undeveloped arable land, and the world is under pressure in terms of its food supply. So logic says Africa has to be the next destination, the breadbasket of the world. And there are already initiatives that are focused on developing agriculture for the world, not just for Africa, but using the land on the African continent. So yes.
Iqbal, just in terms of a final comment from your side, the Africa opportunity is very bright right now. What is the single biggest challenge in your book?
I think it's setting a very, very clear vision of where we want to go as Africans. And getting to that vision. You know, there's great opportunities, there's great people. I was last night at the IPA Innovation Prize for Africa. There were 950 applications from all over Africa. There were 10 incredible winners of that prize. And I wish, Africans could see what Africans are innovating. So I think let's communicate, our successes, let's communicate our challenges, and let's get on the opportunity scale. Let's make sure it happens. At the end of the day, this is the decade of Africa, and we've got to make it happen for sure.